Hello and welcome to today's special video. Today's video is special because it is brought to you by questions from Introduction to Photography classes in fall of 2020. So I have some A's for the Q's in the Q&A, and I'm going to present and share with you. Let's do a dad joke before we begin, as is customary in my videos. So here's the dad joke. Why did the photographer have to give up her career in photography? Because she kept losing her focus. Get it? Focus, photography. Anyway, there you go. All right, so let's discuss what we're gonna do. I've got about 30 or 40 questions. I'm not gonna necessarily get to all of them in the video here, but there are some common things you'll discover in my answers, and we'll take a look at some Lightroom. We've got them categorized. So let's start with the categories. So the categories of questions are camera settings, phone photography, miscellaneous, Lightroom, photography business, inspiration and creativity, gear, and portrait. So lots of different variety, a little bit of everything. One of my most common answers you'll hear from me today is, it depends. Photography, like any art, is so personal that what works for me may not work for you. I mean, obviously all I can do is share my opinion, my experiences in that. So add what I'm sharing here to what you may have already heard or experienced or discovered for yourself. But hopefully there's some fun knowledge here, something new, something you've been wondering about, and now you have one more answer to help you out. So let's get started with camera settings, and here we go. There's a few questions that are similar. They're about shutter speed and either freezing motion or blurring motion in your photo. So the first question is about blurry motion, so blurry motion. So let's talk about that. Shutter speed is connected to the appearance of motion, and the longer duration that shutter speed, the more time you have, the more than your subject will, if it's moving at all, will move within your photo. So if something isn't moving and the camera isn't moving, shutter speed doesn't matter as far as portraying motion. So if you want a photo, let's say, I'm going to bring up a screen here in just a second. We'll do this. So if you want some photos that look like these, light trails. So these are usually car taillights and headlights, the brake lights. If you want a photo like that, that's a longer exposure, longer duration shutter speed. So that means it's anywhere from 5 to 30 seconds usually will get you that look, okay? Another kind of popular look is blurry water. If I can't type today. So here's some blurry water photos, especially something like this. That's a longer exposure as well, probably somewhere 3 to 10 seconds, depending on how fast the water is moving, maybe 2 seconds. So that's how you blur motion. You use the shutter speed control on your camera to do that. Harder to do with phones. Most phones don't have access to direct manipulation of shutter speed. The app, the Lightroom camera app will let you set shutter speed. So that's kind of cool. In the advanced mode, the pro mode, I think they call it. So that's kind of cool. I did get a question, how do you change shutter speed on a Canon camera? Canon camera like this maybe. Depends exactly on your camera. My suggestion is just to Google it, but it does depend. So depending on what mode you're in, on the mode dial, the P, TV, AV, and M dial, depending on what mode you're in. If you're in the TV mode, then you just turn the wheel. That's up here right by the shutter release. Let me get that focus for you. Let's see if I can get a focus. Focus, there we go. You turn this wheel right there, okay? If you're in the M mode, you still turn the wheel, I think, yeah, and then you hold down a different button for and turn that wheel for aperture. So that's how you do that. Okay. So another question related to shutter speed was, how do you freeze motion? So how do you make it look like something isn't moving? And it was specifically, I think, talking about like a water drop. So let's say a photo like this water drop where the water came down and then it comes back up. This is the exact opposite of blurring motion. This is a very fast shutter speed, short duration of time. So, and you need a lot of light for this because you're not getting any light from the time of light. So you need a lot of light in the photo with some external sources usually to get this, because this is 1/1000, 1/2000, 1/4000th of a second. So just a teeny tiny fraction of time. So that's how shutter speed connects to appearance of motion, how to get these different effects. That's kind of a short version. If you want more specifics, send me a comment below and I will help you out. Another question, how do you use shutter speed in black and white to make photos interesting? It all depends. There's my first use of that. It all depends on what you're taking a picture of. If you've got water moving or anything that's moving, sometimes longer shutter speed can make that more interesting. But if you're just using a special effect to get us, because the photo needs more help, then it's probably not going to be enough. If you're taking black and white and it's not looking good, then you need a more interesting composition. You need a more interesting subject and or more interesting light still. So those three things always be there in your photo. So depending on the specific photo of what you would need to make shutter speed be helpful with a black and white photo. How do you make a clear picture of the universe out at night? So we're talking about astrophotography. So the first thing is, don't use a phone. A phone will not really work at night to take pictures like what you're seeing on screen here right now. These kind of photos were not taken with a phone. We got a combination of photos where things look like they're moving. So this is actually a layered bunch of photos, probably 40, 50 photos or even longer. Long exposures layered on top of each other so you get the rings. Looks like you got some movement here with a meteor or asteroid or something, shooting star kind of deal. So these are probably 30, 40 second exposures, sometimes even longer. For night photography, what you need is a technically very capable camera. So for night photography, star photography, it can be kind of expensive because the cameras have high technical requirements. They need to be able to perform well when there's not very much light and you turn the ISO up. You don't want noise in the image. And you also need lenses that open very wide, have wide apertures to let in and soak up a lot of light. So that can be a little expensive. As far as specific, it depends on, if you're doing if you're doing Milky Way, if you're doing Aurora, if you're doing just backyard night photography. The biggest thing, if you're trying to do star and astrophotography, is you need to get away from the light pollution from a city. So generally speaking, these photos are taken 30, 40, 50, 100 miles away from a big city, because then you'd lose, you don't have the light pollution that pollutes the light. So the last question in camera settings is, how do I make my camera stop doing this, where the flash pops up every time I go to focus? How do I stop that? It's easy. So the reason it does this, let me show you the dial here, is in the mode dial, it's on the green A, or the auto mode. All you have to do is click on that and move it one position to the P. So now I'm in the P mode. Well, you can't see. Can you see that I switched that? The P mode. So I'm now in P. I switched from the A. Now I'm in P. And now when I do the half press, it won't pop up the flash. Switch back to A. It wants to pop up the flash. Okay? So switch to the P, and then the flash won't pop up. You can still tell it to pop up with the dedicated button to make the flash come up, but it won't pop up until you tell it to. That was an easy answer. All right, moving on to phone photography. Are there ways to more effectively take photos that have sun in the frame without making everything dark? So usually that's like backlight, the sun is behind your subject, and the answer to that would be yes. But there's trade-offs to the yes answer. So what you have to do is basically you're going to use exposure compensation, and most phones can do this now. What you're going to do is make the sun, the sky, whatever's too bright, make it too bright so you can see your subject. So for example, the way you do this on a phone, you just tap on your screen. Come on, let's get this focus. Can we focus? Focus. It's focusing on my face. Sorry, folks. There we go. All right, so what I'm trying to do is tap on my screen and you pull down, and that will make everything darker. So your subject, do this until your subject looks good. Now any light that's in the frame is going to be, actually you have to go the other way. I'm sorry, you go the other way. You're going to make it brighter. And any light that's in the scene is going to be too bright, but your subject should look good, okay? So I know iPhones work that way. Android phones, I believe you can also do that as well. Basically, it's exposure compensation for your phone. Next question about phones. How can I get closer with my camera phone without getting blurry? There's a limit. Let's see how close I can get. So this is an iPhone 10. So I'm still in focus on my phone. I know it's out of focus here on the video. Still in focus. So that's about the limit. So I took a picture. Come on. There we go. So that's the picture of my camera lens, the video camera lens. I was about less than 2 inches away. So these will focus very close. Now there's another trick here. You have to hold very still, because when you're that close to the subject, any movement in your camera will blur the photo. So don't have any, you have to hold very still and practice good technique of taking photos. I was resting both elbows on my table here. I was tapping the side button rather than tapping the screen. That moves the camera a little bit less. So I hope that helps. These will get close. I can't be that far away, but I can be that far away. Okay. Tips to take good photo when there is not enough light. There aren't any good tips for that, except, so one of the weakness of these cameras, one of the weaknesses is they don't do well when there's not very much light. The newer Android and iPhone 12s and 11s have a low light mode, and it's, from what I've seen, I don't have one, they look pretty spectacular. There's still some limits, but try the low light mode. If you have an older phone, get more light. That's really the only way. And even in low light mode on the newer ones, there's still some limits, and you have to just practice to see what it can do and what it can't do. But generally speaking, these do better with lots of light. Next question, favorite phone editing apps on the phone. I don't really use any except for one. There's a version of Lightroom for the phone, and I quite like it. One of the nice things about it is it has an app, it has a function that for taking photos, which has manual exposure controls for ISO, white balance, and shutter speed, so that's kind of cool. Plus, I can edit my photos. I have this synchronized with my desktop computer so that these photos that you're seeing right here came from my computer. They're synced to my phone so I can edit. I can share to social media. But that's the one I'm familiar with, Lightroom. The free version has 90% of the functionality of the paid version, the subscription version. What you miss in the free version is you miss the selective editing tool, so you don't get the spot brush, the healing brush, you don't get the paint brush, you don't get the radial filter, and you don't get the graduated filter. And I think there's a couple other things. But that's the app I'm familiar with. I don't use any other ones. If you have a favorite phone photo editing app and you want to share it, leave it in the comment down below, and I'd be glad to take a look at that. Okay, why can we not use built-in filters in phone photos? So I always tell students, take photos with your phone in just as is. You can use the portrait mode, but don't use these filters. Where's my filters? So don't use a filter like vivid cool, vivid warm, dramatic, and things like that, because all the photos for the photography class will be edited in Lightroom, and you can get these same looks in Lightroom. But if I take this photo in this silver tone filter, there's no color in it, and I can never get the color back. It's captured without the color, so if I wanted to edit in color in Lightroom, I can't do it. But if I capture it in color, in the original, then I can get any of the other effects, basically filters, and change my mind later on, okay? So that's why I suggest not shooting in black and white, not shooting square, any of the filters, because just take it the way it wants to, the native, original way, and you have all those options available to you when you edit the photo. Now, if you're in a hurry and you just want to get her done and that's good enough, then use the filter. But in class, I don't want that. Okay. What can I do to make my mobile photography better? How can I make my photos more interesting during the cold winter times? That's a tough one about, okay, mobile photography and winter. There's two separate things here. The main thing about phone photography and creating more interesting photos is being aware of the limits of the phone. Dark light or lack of light. It's not a big fan of that. And it's not super detailed photos. So wider shots, or you have to go either really wide or very close with a phone, I think. You have to work harder because the lenses aren't quite as good as lenses like this. There's just more technical limits, so you have to work harder as a photographer on what you compose in the frame, what's the subject, how you place the camera relative to the subject, paying attention to light and all the other things going on. So it can be more work. It can be more work and harder to create an interesting photo with a phone than with a camera because of the technical limits of a phone. But it's doable. It just takes practice. If you're looking at the photo and you like it, that's job number one. If you don't like it, then keep working till you do like it. Try something else. Again, pay attention to that little voice that photographers have in the back of their head that says, ooh, there's a photo here. How do you know when you've gotten that? When you look at your phone or your camera and you go, yeah, I got it. If you're looking at the back of your camera or your phone and you took a photo of that thing and it's not the way you want it yet, it doesn't make you go, ooh, but you go, ooh, take some more photos. Move the camera around. Or maybe you got to come back at a different time of day. Maybe you need different light. Maybe you need to be more dramatic with the light, brighter, darker, rainier, foggier, sunnier, stuff like that. Yeah. All right, last question for phones. I guess this is kind of a general, in relation to winter times. I'm sorry, I forgot to answer that. There's another question about that later. When you have limits of what you can do with your photos because it's kind of blah outside, my encouragement would be to think small. To think small. What I mean by thinking small is to get closer to things. Because when you look at everything, you're going to see especially if you're out walking in the woods or just even walking down in my condo. There's all the little dead leaf branches. There's the compost is happening. There's trash. There's just stuff that if you look wide. But if you get close, so I physically move the camera closer, and that connects to how close can you get with a phone? And the answer is really close. You can get close to things. If your photo isn't interesting enough, try getting closer. That's one of the big three of composition. Fill the frame, get closer. If you physically can move closer, try that. Try that. It works every time of year, but it's especially good in winter. Find ice, frost on a leaf. That's really cool. I always like that. Or even on your windshield of your car, it looks cool when you're close enough. It doesn't look so cool from standing 10 feet away, but it looks cool up close. So get closer, think small, look for light and shadow doing interesting things in the winter. The sun is so low in the sky that it makes some really long shadows up here in the Northwest. So watch for shadows even. You just got to think differently. We don't get the beautiful dramatic summer sunsets, but we get a trade-off, we get some cool shadows. So look for that. Be abstract, think small. All right, so let's move on to the miscellaneous category of questions. The first one is, what techniques do you have for cleaning your camera? It doesn't really apply to phones. This is more like this. What do you mean by cleaning your camera? Let me show you what I mean. I was recently out taking some photos, and I was trying to darken the scene, so I used my aperture to make the aperture. I created a smaller aperture, which is a larger number. This photo is at f/16, and you can see these splotches in the sky. That's not in the sky, that's dust on my camera sensor. That's bad. So on the camera here, there's little bits of dust. They're teeny tiny, but as you make your aperture smaller, you will be able to see them. How do you address this? Well, if you have a mirrorless camera, it's easier. So a mirrorless camera means a camera like this Fuji that doesn't have a mirror in the way. Watch the video on camera types if you've forgotten what I'm talking about. This camera, this Canon, has a mirror between the sensor and the lens that pops up when you click a photo. So that's how it can see. Sorry, let me get this back on. So it's harder to do with this because there's that mechanical mirror in the way. If you're Google your camera name, go to YouTube, watch a video on how to clean your camera sensor, enter your camera name, and look and see if you're willing to do it. Sometimes there's more involved with a mirror, with a DSLR camera. A mirrorless camera is pretty easy, and I've done it. The first step, the low-tech way, is this just blows. It's don't use compressed air like from the Office Depot or something. This is designed for ionized or something, I don't know. But all you do is just blow. I'm blowing on the sensor. I don't know if this is helping or not. Sometimes it will actually, the dust will kind of stick. So you need a second option. And now we're going to actually physically get a little more scary. You need to actually physically wipe off the sensor, and there's a few companies that make these kind of things. This is the one I've used. It's called Visible Dust, and they make these special swabs that are designed with a liquid that you very gently wet the swab with 2 or 3 drops of these unicorn tears, and you just swipe across once, and then you throw the thing away. And 99 times out of 100, that does everything. Again, it's easier on this kind of camera, a mirrorless camera, because you don't have to get the mirror out of the way. I've cleaned my sensors. I can't find my swabs. I have these somewhere, but I couldn't find them. I would show you how to do it. Again, watch a YouTube video, decide how nervous this makes you. There's a couple local camera store. Well, there's one, I should say. There's a camera shop in Seattle called Phototronics, I believe. that will clean your sensor. I think it's about $85. It takes a couple days. But if you're nervous at all, by all means have a pro do it, because if you mess up, my first year teaching, I messed up by trying to clean a camera, and it cost me $400 to fix my autofocus. So don't do that. Don't do like your Uncle Michael. All right, here's, let's see what else we got in miscellaneous. Tips to take good pictures when using the camera's flash. So again, we're this kind of camera, or maybe even on an iPhone. Tips for taking good pictures with this. There aren't any. This flash is low power. It's a small light source, so you're going to get hard shadows. Most people don't look good in hard shadows. Same thing with a phone. You've got this little tiny light source that's not super bright. So the short version is, in my experience, the flash on top of your camera is not going to do it. The flash on your phone is not going to do it. You need something more like this. Okay. If you take Art 148, if we ever get to offer it again when we're on campus, the portrait photography class, oops, let's do that. Boom. Then you will get a chance to use this kind of flash or two. These can go on the camera, but they also, the magic of these is they can go off camera, and then you trigger them with a remote on the camera that talks to this and says fire now. And then you can get really amazing light with enough power, and then you put it in an umbrella or another modifier, a box to make it softer. Yeah, that's the short version. The short version is basically don't use the flash on your camera. They're just kind of poo. If it's the only way to get the photo that day, that time, then it's better than not having the photo. If your camera performs well in low light, turn the ISO up. Turn the ISO up. If you're using a phone, well, that's doesn't do well with high ISO. All right, we got another couple of miscellaneous, and they're related to light and artificial light. What are some interesting ways to play with light while taking photos? Well, if you have if you're using an artificial light of some kind, move the light around in relation to the subject. I mean, light will change how your subject looks depending on where it is in relation to your subject. If you put it behind or above, you just get a different look. So that's one thing. Move your camera and change the position of the light source relative to your subject. Different times of day. Sunrise, sunset, morning, evening. That's one thing to play. Find light that isn't doing the normal thing. Sunrise, sunset again. Fog, snow, rain. Yeah, try those things. Next miscellaneous question. How do you know when you found your style? And how do you know that style is yours? Style is an interesting question, and a phrase I've heard used is that instead of using the word style is voice. Style is kind of a layer. When we talk about style, we talk about what's in style, and when you say that, that means there's going to be out of style. Your style, you, will be not replaced anytime soon, hopefully. By that I mean what you do, what's uniquely you, will not change in 6 months. It might change in 6 years, but in 6 months it's probably going to be pretty similar. So how do you find your voice? How do you find you? And it's more a discovery than being intentional, and I'm gonna be this style, because that's not fake, but it's not as authentic. The way I found, let me just use myself. The way I found my style and my voice is looking back on what is repeated. What do I do over again? What subjects do I take photos of? What type of compositions do I use over again? What kind of processing in Lightroom do I use over and over again? that's my style, that's my voice. So you discover it in hindsight. It's hard to say, I'm going to do this style, I'm going to do this, because that's someone else's. If it's authentic, it just kind of comes out of as you create, in my opinion. So you find your style in hindsight by looking back and going, that's what I do. And it'll evolve, and it might even, there'll be times when it's drastically different. It changes. So go with the flow. Do what you enjoy. That's my biggest suggestion and encouragement, is to keep working at things you enjoy. If you're making art that you don't enjoy, that's just business maybe at best. So if it doesn't feed you, nurture you, then there's going to be something missing from that art. So yeah, that's about style. All right, let's move on to a new category, and that category is Lightroom. Couple questions here. The first question is easy. I can answer it in one word. So you've been able to use Lightroom for free while you've been using Highline's license to use Lightroom at home. And the question is, will I be able to do that after the quarter? And the answer to that is no, unfortunately. But the longer answer, because you know I'm going to have a longer answer, is Lightroom is not very expensive, in my opinion, as far as photography things go. The subscription to Lightroom is $10 a month. 2 lattes, a couple McNugget meals, okay? So it's not super expensive. You get access to both versions of Lightroom, so you get Classic and CC. You can choose the one you prefer. We've been mostly using Classic. Unless you're on a Chromebook, then you've been using CC. Also gives you access to synchronize with your mobile device, which is awesomely fun. And you also get Photoshop. So lots of stuff for $10 a month, in my opinion. I would recommend it. If you're going to be serious about photography, Lightroom is the most common tool for editing and organizing photos. I highly recommend it. All right, when I take pictures, here's the next question. When I take pictures, sometimes I can tell there is something missing even after editing. How can I find a way to fix that photo instead of getting rid of the photo? One of the first things I said about Lightroom, so let me summarize this question. I've taken a photo, I've edited it in Lightroom, and I'm not happy. I think that's my understanding of the question. One of the first things I said about Lightroom, it's not going to fix a poopy photo. Lightroom is not going to take an okay photo and make it magical. Okay, so it all starts with a photo that's got potential. That's interesting. That's the language I've used all quarter. So you've got interesting subject, interesting light, interesting composition, interesting Lightroom work. So hopefully all 4 of those components, those ingredients add up to create an interesting photo. And there's not enough interest you can create in just the 4th one, Lightroom, that will overcome weakness in the 3 previous: light, subject, composition. Start with an interesting photo, okay? Interesting photo before you get to Lightroom. Now, when I'm creating photos, I'm oftentimes thinking about how I'll work on it in Lightroom, but I'm not thinking how will I save it in Lightroom. I'll think about, I don't need to move that because 1, I can't, and 2, I can remove it in Lightroom, or it's going to be a little bright, a little dark. I know I can fix that in Lightroom faster than trying to fix it or bring out a whole bunch of flash or things like that I just don't have time or allowed to do. Okay. Here's a question about using in phones. Most of the new phones have portrait mode, so you can change the blurriness of the background. And the question is, can I do that in Lightroom? And the answer is no. The answer is no. Lightroom doesn't have an easy or even any way to really do that. You can maybe brush with some negative sharpness in the background and try and do that, but it's not very effective in my experience. That would be more a Photoshop thing with your blend layers and blur one, and yeah, even then it's pretty hard to do convincingly that doesn't look fake. So that's one thing that's nice about these phones. They do those blurry background portrait mode kind of things. All right. Difference between Lightroom and Photoshop. That's the next question. The difference between Lightroom and Photoshop is basically I've been able to teach you Photoshop. I mean Lightroom, and you're probably almost an expert now in it. In the 10 weeks of this quarter, we would just be kind of getting into like a third or fourth subject in Photoshop. It's so deep, it's so big, it's huge. So we just need more time. Photoshop is much more powerful. I mean, I could replace the background in Photoshop if I took a picture of this. I could change, I could do lots of things, major pixel surgery in Photoshop that we don't have in Lightroom, but it takes a lot longer to learn how to do that. Also, Photoshop doesn't help you organize your photos. Lightroom does. So I'm a big fan of Lightroom. I do 95% of all my photos never get touched in Lightroom. I mean, in Photoshop. It's probably even higher than that, probably like 98%. It's pretty rare that I have to use Photoshop. Lightroom's cool. Okay, here's the next question about Lightroom. Why don't we use the auto button instead of going through each item? Wouldn't that save time? So I don't know if you know this, but where is it? I don't even know where it is. In the basic panel, there it is. In the basic panel of Lightroom, there's this button that's next to the tone that says auto. And it just works in the tone section, I believe. No, it does vibrance and saturation too, and color. Why don't we just use that? Well, here's why. It's the same reason why I don't recommend using filters on your phone photos. Filters were created by somebody else. The auto is a math that's created by somebody else. And it doesn't necessarily fit your voice, your style of photography and editing. So it could be a good starting point, but just like when I showed you about presets, well, no, that's a little, I wanted to be a little darker. So I'm going to go darker than what the auto wants to do. And maybe I'm going to go desaturated. So there's lots of reasons not to use the auto. If you're stuck and just want to see what it does, click on it and then adjust to your personal taste. I don't teach about it just because it doesn't take that much longer to move the other sliders. Most of the time I'm done with an edit in Lightroom in less than 2 minutes. Yes, the button does it in 2 seconds, but that's my opinion. I'm a control freak, so I don't use the auto. If you like it, go for it. All right, next question. To create a photo, is it 50% the original photo and 50% post-production, or is it some kind of balance? And I will use my favorite answer again. It depends. Again, it all starts with that good photo. So I'm going to say I'm going to say 75%, if I had to put a number on it, relies on having a good starting point. Maybe even 80 or 90%. And then you get that last bit, even if it's a dramatic bit, a dramatic change. For example, let's look at this. Here, I'll show you a photo, recent photo. So I will do this one. So this photo, here's where it started. It's not as dramatic as I seem to remember, but it's a decent difference. It's a decent difference, but it all started with the photo. If I didn't have the photo, these edits wouldn't help. Let's see if I have another one that's maybe more dramatic. Yeah, so here's an example. This one is maybe a little more dramatic. Just looking up at these trees, here's my edit. Got some more blue in the sky, create a little more interest. Dramatic. One more while we're here. That's before. This is after I went black and white and things like that. So what's the ratio? It all starts with a good photo, an interesting photo. It goes from there. Lightroom's not going to rescue a photo that's not interesting. It's going to add interest to an already interesting photo. It's going to add more of you, your voice, your visual style to an image. All right, let's move on to photography business. If I were wanting to become a photographer, what's some good equipment to start with? How should I start my photography business? Photography business is a great idea. It's a great thing to do as a side project to see if you enjoy it for one, and two, because it takes a while to get going. Most businesses don't fail because of lack of success. They just don't have enough time to succeed. So give yourself a couple of years to try and build enough business. And maybe while you're living at home, or you have a second job, or maybe your photography is on the weekend, it's not your main source of income. That's my suggested way to start. Now, some people love to jump in with both feet and go for it. What's good equipment to start with? The camera you already have. If you don't have a camera, I'll make a resource page for Highline students that you'll get to see in Canvas with a link to some beginner camera equipment. If you want to have more conversation about that, let me know. I would budget somewhere between $500 and $1,000 if you can. More is always better with camera gear. But that's kind of about the baseline, is about $500 to $1,000 to get started. Another question about getting started is, should I take pictures of family members and friends maybe to get started? And again, I think that depends. I actually am more comfortable taking photos of strangers because I don't already know them. There's no baggage. There's no emotional connection, or lesser, I should say. So it's easier for me personally to take pictures of people I don't know than people I do know. So it depends. If it's really easy for you to negotiate that conversation with friends and families, by all means, because they will generally be so grateful for the photos you're going to create of them. They'll probably be the best photos they've ever had. So yeah, do it. However, there's no one way to start a photography business. There's no one dollar amount. There's no one method. You just got to find a way that works for you and be willing to adjust and modify and go from there. Another question that's going to come up is how do you know you're a professional photographer? You're a professional photographer the minute someone pays you. And maybe they just bought you lunch, but that's still a kind of payment. So yeah, I recommend it. There's no reason you shouldn't be. If you enjoy photography and you think you might want to explore that as an income option, go for it. But some people, they enjoy it so much that they don't want to connect money to it in any way. Because sometimes connecting money to it, what you have to balance then is the needs of your audience, your customer, and what you want to do. And there's a spectrum of that. Do you completely cater to your customer and maybe not enjoy it as much, or do you completely do only what you want to do and nobody wants to buy that? So sometimes you got to find that middle ground of where what you want to do meets where your customers are, and see if that is a happy place to be for everybody. Some general questions about starting a photography business and getting customers and growing and things like that. It's not the only way. You have to tell people what you do. That's the short version. You have to be consistent and persistent in telling people what you do. You have to have social, well, you don't have to, but ways to do that include social media, create a YouTube channel, Facebook, a website, go to meetings, it's harder to do right now, but be in places where people are interested in buying photography. By saying all that, you can kind of figure out pretty quickly that the marketing, the PR, the letting people know about it is a full-time job in itself. So it's hard. It's hard for me anyway, I should say. It's hard for me. So be aware of all the work you're going to have to do to get the photography work. Most working photographers who are doing it full time, they maybe spend 10 to 20% of their time taking photos. The rest of the time is administrative, is marketing, is bill paying, is business related expenses. Yeah, there's so much to do. Communication with clients. Yeah. So you got to have the temperament for it. Take some business classes while you're here at Highline. I highly recommend that. Learn business, learn marketing, learn communication, learn some psychology. Being a business person is more than just being a good artist. Yeah, I'll use the music scene as an example. There's lots of music out there that is amazing that none of us have ever heard. And we just haven't heard it because a combination of luck and their management and their publicity and their opportunity and timing just hasn't put it in front of us. So same thing with photography or any kind of art. Hope that makes sense. Let's see, we'll get a couple more in here about photography business. How do you make money from photography? Again, it depends. Depends on who you are, how you do it. There's kind of a joke in photography. The best way to make money in photography is to teach others how to be photographers. It's kind of what I do. It's my primary source of photography income is teaching at Highline. So how do you make money? You can be a portrait photographer. That's probably in some ways it's the most common way. People will pay for a portrait, a picture of themselves and their family or an event in their life more so than your cool picture of, let's see, that's Suffolk Cathedral. Let me back up so you can see it. Where is it? Can't point. That you love on their wall. They're less likely to pay for that than a picture of themselves. So portrait photography, landscape photography, stock photography, business, real estate, landscape, I think I covered that, fine art. There are lots and lots of types of photography. Again, there's no one way. Just experiment, try different things, see what fits your artistic self as well as the practical commercial side of things. See if you can find a good fit. I'm glad to discuss this with you. If you want, again, leave a comment below, send me an email, and we can have a deeper discussion about this. I'm good at coaching about this, less good about doing it myself. So just, you've been warned. You've been warned. All right, so that's some of the business questions. Let's move on to inspiration and creativity. All right, so we are on inspiration and creativity. There's a couple questions here. How do you get inspired by looking at other people's work without losing yourself? By that, I mean, you're probably copying someone else. And here's how I do it. When I look at other people's work, I think, oh, I want to create stuff like that. And then I'll go maybe a day later or maybe a few hours later and then go try and create something. And so that inspirational photo is in the back of my brain. And no matter how hard I exactly try and copy it, I don't know about you, but it never is 100%, and that's good. It's never 100% copy. It's a new work inspired by another. So if you can seek inspiration rather than duplication, I think that's awesome. So where you take a little from this source, a little from this, combine it with the uniqueness that is you, that's going to create more interesting art and be a unique reflection of you, the gift that you are as you create your art. So do that. Inspiration, not duplication. Next question about creativity is, especially during this lockdown time, this COVID time, this limited, restricted ability to move about, how do I take interesting photos in the place where I live or near the place where I live? And, you get bored, it looks the same. How do you see things differently? And I'm going to make two suggestions. One, the first one is kind of practical. I live in a condo. There's 130 units, I think. It's near some woodlands. It's near some wetlands. So if I walk a little bit beyond just my neighborhood, that helps. But here's what I found is really interesting. Look for something different. So look for something different in the environment. By that I mean when it rains, it's different. Well, except this time of year. If it's foggy, if it's frosty, look for sunrise, look for sunset with colors doing something different in the sky. So 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it probably mostly is going to look the same, but maybe 6 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning. And the nice thing about winter in the Northwest is sunrise happens around 7:45 in the morning, so you don't have to get up early. And sunset happens around 4 o'clock, it feels like, so you don't have to stay up late and interrupt your dinner. So try those. Look for interesting light doing something, or interesting atmospherics with fog and frost. Another thing I would suggest that's kind of practical is, I think I suggested this earlier, but get small. Think closer, think intimate. So rather than a big picture of all the cars in your parking lot, maybe with frost on them, get close to one car and look at the frost on its windshield. Or especially with frost, it can do this kind of cool thing where it looks like it's standing up. If you get close enough, you can see it almost looks like a little mohawk or something, haircut. Yeah, so try that. And then a more philosophical attitude thing to do is to start seeing interesting photos in your ordinary setting. Is paying attention to light and shadow. Keep coming back to light, because your subjects are probably not going to be super interesting. They're going to be ordinary things you walk by all the time, but maybe within that there's a cool little detail by getting closer, by hunting for it, by looking. Again, practical. Just get up and take a walk. Walk for 20, 30 minutes. You might see something different, and maybe you walk half of your walk in one direction and then reverse your way and come back the same way you already walked, but you're looking at it from a new perspective. So yeah, I hope that helps a little bit. That's a good question. That's a tough one. I struggle with it. I found that I'm grateful I have the flexibility. I have a car. I can go drive a little bit. And the neat thing around here in the Northwest is you don't have to drive very far to get to some place that's kind of neat in nature, usually. So I hope that helps. All right, our next category is gear. The first question is about lenses. What are the different lenses for? What are all the different lenses for? What are they for? Why do we have them? Why do we have so many lenses? Why do we have? I have 5 here. Okay, why do we have all these lenses? Well, some of them are general purpose, some are special purpose. Some are really designed for low light. That's why we have different lenses, is they have different uses. Having said all that, you really only need one. You only really need one lens. I have a friend who for the longest time took photos with one lens, a 50mm prime lens, so something kind of like this, on her Canon 5D Mark III, I think it was. And she photographed weddings, she photographed portraits, she photographed events, she photographed nature and travel with one lens. One lens. So lenses are expensive, be aware of that. They do affect the technical quality of your image. They do give you flexibility, but it's not going to fix everything in your photography. It does become part of your style, your voice. I tend to like telephoto, although I'm working with the lens that's currently recording this video, 23mm, so a wider lens. I'm gonna have a project. I have a project where I'm working for a month, taking photos with that lens, primarily. And I'm really enjoying it because I'm seeing the world differently than I usually do. And change is good. So what do you need? What's the different purposes? Find out what kind of photography you want to do, and then determine what is the general kind of specification of a lens or lenses you might need, and go from there. If you want to have more conversation about that, leave a comment below, send me an email at Highline, and I'm glad to dig deeper on that. But lenses are awesome. They're going to blow you away with how expensive they are. But the nice thing is you buy a lens and you're going to use it for 10 or 20 or longer years. So that's that. Let's see. More lens stuff. Hang on a second. There was a question about a filter. So in this video, hang on a second, a video you watched in class, Sean Tucker talking to Rachel Talabart, she's using this filter. And the question was, what is that? I'm pretty sure that filter, in fact, I know what that filter is. It's called a graduated or it's a neutral density filter. And that comes to the second question, which is, or another question I should say, what are some tips for shooting long exposure when it's also pretty bright outside? So Rachel tends to take photos that have some motion blur into them, so a longer exposure, maybe 1/30th to 1 second. And it's pretty bright most of the time when she's creating photos. So you can't get a shutter speed that slow, even with the smallest aperture. So what you need to do is something like this. This is called a neutral density filter. It's basically sunglasses for your lens. It darkens everything up so you can get to longer exposures because you need more time when there's less light because it's been blocked. She might be using what's called a graduated neutral density, which means it's darker at the top and then it fades out, kind of like the graduated filter we use in Lightroom. That'll have the effect of darkening the bright sky, but leave the foreground alone. Kind of cool. Filters. These are the only kind of filters I really use. That's another question about filters. I don't like filters, again, for color or for starburst or for things like that because, again, for color, I can get that in Lightroom. And if I put a color filter on my camera, then the photo is that color now. So I can't change that very easily. All right. More gear. Okay, I think I've answered all those other questions in another place. So let's move on to portraits. Portraits. How do you make portraits interesting? That's the best question. Interesting portraits. What do you think? When you look at a portrait of someone, what makes it interesting to you? Here's what I think. And since it's my class, you get my answer. I think what makes a portrait interesting is when there's something magical, and that is hard to quantify. In fact, it's impossible. In what has been recorded in the click of the camera of the person whose photo is being taken. So you can see the person, you can see who they really are. There's some vulnerability, there's some authenticity, there's that moment, who they are in that one fraction of time. Okay, that's special. I think that's what makes a portrait. Now, how do you get there? That's some of the other questions. How do you pose people? How do you make people comfortable? That's different for everybody. It depends, that answer again. But I think the best way to make people comfortable so you can hopefully capture that magic when you click the shutter is by being authentic and natural yourself. As you're communicating, as you're talking with people, there's nothing worse than when you're having your picture taken and someone's doing this. They're just behind the camera and they're just clicking, and they're clicking and not talking. So this is what you get. Hang on a second. Let me get this where I need it to be. Kind of weird, huh? Yeah, there needs to be conversation. So in a continual working at letting the person know, this is great, it's working, tilt your head, do this, do that. Just even telling jokes while you're doing it, however you find works for you. And just like you're a unique individual, you will communicate differently than I do. I will communicate differently than someone else does. And that's part of the magic. So find a way that's comfortable for you, that's authentic. I tend to use humor and be a little loud in my behind the camera conversation with subjects. Not everybody likes that. It's not them. So be yourself. Ways to learn how to pose people, how to do that, how to help people feel like they're comfortable and look their best. I would suggest just going to YouTube, portrait posing for normal people who aren't models, things like that. There's a bunch of videos on there, and there's some really good ones that can help you with that. And then another thing that you can directly control is your comfort and your confidence. So if you project comfort and confidence, you've practiced a little bit, maybe with family and friends or your dog or your favorite stuffed animal, So you're comfortable with the mechanical side of this, the technical side. Then when you're creating portraits with someone, you can concentrate on the personal side because you've mastered the technical. So yeah, it all goes together, the technical and the personal and the creative and the artistic. All right, so let's see what else we got for portraits. There's a question here kind of about street photography, which is you see someone and you're like, I want to create a portrait with you. How do you do that? I honestly don't know. I don't do that. I won't walk up to someone and say, hey, you have an interesting face. I'd like to create a portrait with you. I'm not comfortable doing that. There are some techniques to it. Again, I'd recommend maybe YouTube for that. But I'm not personally comfortable with it. Partially being a guy, it's a little creepy. So stick with people who you either know or who have worked, who are intentionally, you're working with them to create portraits. It's not a surprise or an ambush. That's my suggestion, especially right now with masks and everything in public. So, all right. Last but not least here, when taking portraits to get a blurry background, how do you do that? The way I do it is I usually use a more telephoto lens. A longer focal length with the widest aperture I can get. That's what this lens is for. I use this for profile photo type photos, so just the kind of head and shoulders kind of thing. In fact, I just used it today. This goes to aperture 2.8, so it lets in a lot of light. And so that gets the background blurry. So that's how I do that. More telephoto, get physical distance, separation from your subject to the background, and there you go. So, questions and answers. I think I covered most of them. I may have missed one or two, but I think there were some overlaps, so hopefully we got them all. If you have other questions or a follow-up question to any of these, I'd be super happy to answer that question. Just leave it in the comments below, or again, send me an email through Highline if you are a student at Highline. Thank you for these questions. They always make me think and help me rediscover why I enjoy teaching so much and why I enjoy photography. Yeah, I hope you find the same thing. So have fun out there taking photos, creating images in, right now this is the end of fall quarter, so it's getting dark, it's getting wet, so it is a challenge to create photos outside, or maybe you're stuck inside. So look for those challenges. If you need a homework assignment because you don't know what to take pictures of, but you want to take pictures, just, again, leave me a note below. I'm glad to give you a quickie assignment. It won't be graded, but it'll be fun. So have fun with that. Continue creating images, making your art, and I hope you really enjoy it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.